You're listening to the Procuretech Podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, Procurement Pro, Digital Nomad, and Procuretech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of the Procuretech Podcast, where every episode we bring you everything that is fun, exciting, and innovative in the digital procurement space. We are continuing again today with our mini-series talking to industry thought leaders, content creators, and experts, and getting their take on everything that is happening in relation to digital procurement and how it's really impacting what they do for a living or for their role within the wider procurement community. And my guest today is Director of Procurement Content for CASME. CASME is a membership organization for procurement professionals. And as I'm sure Graham will tell me, they have a rather unique approach on how they do things. Specifically, they don't have sponsors. So Graham Crawshaw from CASME, warm welcome to the show.
James, thank you. Great to be talking with you again.
Yeah, I was on your podcast actually, about 3 months ago. We're talking all things digital. So we'll probably touch on a couple of similar topics. I'll leave the link actually in the show notes to that one if you want to check out CASME's podcast where I was their guest. Full disclosure as well, I also work as a freelance facilitator for CASME, just in case anyone was wondering. So Graham, just give a quick, very brief whistle-stop tour of your career in procurement and ultimately then when you landed with CASME and how long you've been working with them.
Okay, so I'm one of those quite unusual people that wanted to go into procurement as soon as I left university.
Wow.
I studied at
There aren't many.
And there aren't many, and it was because the course specialised in the sort of different types of procurement. And back many years ago when I graduated, it was certainly quite a good thing to get a job. And whereas my fellow students had struggled to get jobs, they'd studied finance or marketing. In the procurement side, we'd got three options because the organisations, and in fact, it was British Telecom, ICL, remember that name, both sort of were very, very keen to take on the graduates. But I ended up working for Thorn EMI, and that got me eventually into the music industry and supported procurement in all types of both direct procurement, looking after components that went into producing compact discs, vinyl, even music cassettes. And then also looking at indirect procurement, working with marketing and packaging and all things connected with making music. Did that within EMI and then as a consultant supported other music companies. And it was at that point that I first got to know about CASME. Jonathan Lyles, who owns the company, got me to facilitate a few roundtables, just as we ask you to do, James. Well, my story ended up with me becoming a full-time employee and responsible now for all of the procurement content of everything that we do at CASME. So really strange how my career has evolved. I worked in Los Angeles at Capitol Tower for almost 4 years. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think now is such a great time to be involved with procurement. Why would you want to work in any other function?
Well, probably to have an easier life these days, but no, I get it. Procurement can be fun if you're with the right company and you're not drowning in process. It's indeed.
That is true. Very true.
So we were talking before we went on air. You started doing facilitation for CASME round about the time of the last sort of great financial crisis recession back in 2008.
Yes.
And you've been full-time for the past, 5 years, 6 years?
Yeah, time goes on when you're having fun. So yes, it must be around that point.
So casting back to your time in the music industry, and then also then sort of pivoting to your role now. To what extent back then versus now has procurement technology impacted you or the business or the type of content and roundtables and facilitation events that you're putting on these days in relation to what you were doing, say, 5, 10, 15 years almost ago when you first joined CASME?
I did my entire thesis on computer-aided procurement,
wow.
Which I should probably blow the cobwebs off, but you'd be cringing if you read anything that from the early 1990s. And what I've seen is technology being slowly applied and introduced at almost the same point of procurement itself maturing, taking greater control, involvement, working better with the organization, with stakeholders. I think it's gone very much hand in hand. Now, have the tools kept up with providing what procurement needs? I'd say no.
Yeah.
Has it been easy? Absolutely not. Is it easy and have we got all the tools that we need now? No way. If anything, for large companies, it can be a massive challenge. I think we're right in the middle. We know our appetite has been whetted, if you like, with what can be done. But it's a question of, well, how do we actually get there? What needs to happen? How can we invest? Can we even justify the investment? And are there the tools that are mature enough to really give us what we're looking for?
That's a great answer. And I'll pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned there. So you said that technology has matured with procurement, but the technology hasn't perhaps kept up with the pace of what procurement needs. And I think that's a really interesting observation. I would certainly agree with that. With that in mind, can you give me one specific area of procurement or even wider supply chain in general, if we look a bit more holistically in terms of things like transparency and traceability? Is there one area where you think technology will have or is having or perhaps has the potential to have the biggest impact, bearing in mind that perhaps historically it hasn't kept up, but certainly in the past, certainly since COVID, and even you could argue going back to around about 2017 when you started to see an explosion of sort of more best of breed, agile startups in this space, there really started to be a mushrooming of different options that were out there.
You know what? I'm going to start with procurement analytics. And actually, the procurement analytics is more the slightly advanced approach because for many companies, it's still back with the basics of spend analytics. I would say more and more companies have got that under better control. It still can be frustrating if you've got multiple ERP systems, if you've got other complexities of organizations that perhaps have, through acquisition, have got different sort of systems or different taxonomies to work. It's not easy. But what we are seeing is that maturing of understanding spend, but then making it more into procurement analytics to help and provide the information to actually make decisions, turning that data into providing insights that procurement can use with stakeholders. So I think it's very much moving and building on that transactional, that data that says what you've been buying to make it much more sort of value focused. And so it's a journey. I would suggest most companies are going through that at the moment.
So you're saying that even though spend analytics platforms have been around for a while, and I think Cievo is probably the oldest one, and they've been around since 2003. Am I right then in understanding that you're saying that the advancement in AI and in machine learning and in some of the capabilities of the software is allowing us to push more frontiers in terms of, really understanding and getting the machine to analyze our spend without having to then sort of take that data offline and play around with it in Excel?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that is where it is developing, but it's still going to take time. We had a webinar ourselves that at CASME, we had around 400 procurement professionals contribute. And out of those 400, we still had 30% of people saying their procurement analytics was limited to spend analysis. A further 20% linking it and saying it's at data management level. A further 25% saying it's at descriptive analytics level. I think, James, that there is a perception that every other company is much more advanced than your own company. And I don't believe it. I think when people are honest, everyone is frustrated, but are going through that process of really trying to move it forward to get that data so that they can turn it into knowledge and actually use it to run the business.
And I think that's even more insightful when we consider who you're typically coming into contact with in your CASME roundtables, because broadly speaking, CASME represents category managers and procurement professionals for more sort of enterprise or certainly larger companies, doesn't it? So, I mean, we're not talking about SMEs or even, the lower end of the mid-market here. We're talking pretty much enterprise and large companies. So, yeah, even when they...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And 200 of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, even when they haven't got everything...
200 of them as well. So we do get that perspective. Yeah, I think it's almost... I do wonder whether companies that are of mid-size have actually got it a bit easier because maybe they haven't got all the operations in different countries, different cities around the world. I also wonder that procurement may have a easier process of justifying investment, whereas actually with the large companies that are constrained by their investment and use of the very well-known large ERP systems that we all love to hate, then you've not got that agility. You haven't got that flexibility just to take it from a procurement perspective. I see so many frustrations because these systems are from a finance perspective, not specifically procurement.
Yeah, I think you're right. And certainly, with what we're doing at procurementsoftware.site, our target audience is really the mid-market, because there are other websites and other portals and research houses that cater more towards enterprise. And my take on this is certainly you're right in terms of putting together, getting spend analytics is going to be, in most cases, easier for that side of business because they don't have as many legacy systems. I think where the challenge comes is that typically in mid-sized businesses, you're normally going to get a head of procurement or a CPO that's probably come from corporate and taken a step down to a smaller company to get a head of role and to get more hands-on exposure. And their team is inevitably going to be smaller and, somewhat more leanly resourced. And he or she's not going to have a center of excellence or an internal consulting team. I think that's perhaps where there's more education that's necessary. And also just because of salary requirements, they're often not going to have a team of A players because of constraints that they have on being able to pay for the best talent. So I think there are pros and cons on both sides, but I definitely agree with what you're saying with not only the ERP systems, but if these large enterprises have implemented one of these legacy source to pay or source to contract providers X number of years ago and, paid in most cases, a 7-figure sum for that investment when you consider, all of the consulting and adaptation that they've had to do of the out of the box tool. You're absolutely right to be able to put together a business case to go back to the CFO and say, yeah, this doesn't really do what we want. We need some more tech. It is a little bit going with your tail between your legs, isn't it? To a certain extent.
It is. But that's why we've seen some of the technology that bolts on the top and has, through the development of the APIs, has got the ability to communicate so much better. And I think that ability to communicate has improved literally over the last sort of 2-3 years. And therefore, you don't need to rely on the massive ERP system, but actually get your knowledge and data from the bespoke software or the system that you've got sat on top of it.
Yeah, and I think new graduates coming in, Gen Zs, they're not going to have the patience to figure out how to use a legacy ERP system, or even some of these old school source to pay platforms, are they? You know, they want an Amazon-like, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but they want an Amazon-like experience. And I think UI and UX is only going to become more and more important. I think there is a growing realization that, especially if it's a platform that people need to use outside of procurement, for anyone that requisitions or does quality management or anything like that, for example, it needs to have an easy user interface. Spend analytics, okay, maybe not so important because outside of finance, it's basically just procurement that use it. But yeah, I think that is a big differentiator, who's using it. And that should then drive to what ease of use you need or what level of intuitiveness you need from the platform.
But also having the ability to interpret that data into conversation, into reports, into presentations that are going to be accepted by stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think the data just presenting PowerPoint with a few charts and graphs on it, that's not the answer. It is this interpretation of what data that you can get access to and how you can then use that to tell the story, to get the message across. And I think that's what I'm now seeing, more and more of that interpretation and wanting to also understand what other companies are doing and how other procurement functions are working. And I guess that's the beauty of CASME. You bring people together, have those conversations and support the data with the peer-to-peer understanding, and then present that to stakeholders to help define and work on your category.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit because you obviously get to have a lot of conversations with people from very different organizations. And one of the unique things about CASME is that there is no sponsorship. Your monetization model is from the members rather than from software companies or solutions providers. So you are always going to be,
yes,
as a facilitator, completely agnostic in that regard. To what extent are you finding technology or digitization as the driver behind procurement improvement journeys or centers of excellence, the agenda that they have in relation to some of the other big hitting topics that are out there, like talent retention and sustainability and, wider supply chain issues through geopolitical instability? Where would you rank it in terms of the thing that's driving the agenda?
I think the challenge that procurement's got is there is so much going on at the moment. So to put a ranking is really difficult. Digitalization is certainly on that top, probably 5 of projects, but so is risk management. So is sustainability and dealing with supply chain disruption. And of course, number 1 at the moment is inflation.
Yeah.
Dealing with that. So I think procurement recognizes that the tools are really there to help and support rather than the be all and end all. And I think it's that balance that needs to be taken into account. But I think procurement's good at that because I think we get so involved and deliver so much value in different areas that actually it works. And a great procurement professional has got that ability to juggle all things, whether it is negotiating internally with the CEO or whichever level they're operating at, and also negotiating with suppliers. So digitalization, all these systems, it's almost a means to an end. I guess just putting it in perspective, it's there, it's got to be done, but it's not always easy to get that business case. And there are other priorities that mean that procurement's struggling a little bit, I would suggest, to really devote the time. And as you say, James, get the right resource, the skilled resource to be able to get the most benefit from some of these advances. Yeah,
and doing that half-heartedly is a recipe for disaster, isn't it? I mean, I had on the last series, I had Professor Dr. Florian Kleemann. He's a lecturer at Munich University of Applied Sciences, and he talks a lot about change management. And we had a great discussion on that and how that's vital to any sort of digital transformation success. I'll link to that in the show notes. Actually, Flo's a great guy. Hey, so just a quick interlude to let you know about procurementsoftware.site. This is a new website that I recently launched to give you, the listener, a free-to-access, intuitive guide to digital procurement technology. You can filter on a multitude of different criteria and pick out a short list of procurement software solutions that are relevant to your business and your needs in less time than it takes to boil an egg. No corporate subscriptions, no complex jargon, and definitely no pay-to-play model. We are a completely transparent, open book, and we really want to get your feedback on what we can really do to make this user experience better and constantly improve so as we're providing value to you. Check out procurementsoftware.site. And now let's get right back to this week's podcast. You recently did a panel discussion on what you termed eProcurement, but I think just for clarity, it's, wider, procurement technology in general. What were some of the insights or outcomes of that discussion? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely, James. So we were looking at what are the activities and processes that eProcurement sort of helps the most. And when you look at the results, it's very much processing requisitions, processing purchase orders, automating the accounts payable systems, controlling all of those sort of workflows. We also asked about the spend under management. So that's a phrase we often talk about within procurement. And it was really interesting because out of the almost 200 people on this discussion, 20% were managing more than 90% of spend. So
wow.
Big tick in the box for them.
Yeah.
But then 25% managing between 75 and 90, 20% between 50 and 75, and 24% between 25 and 50%. I hope that works out. But basically, quite big chunks of differentiated groupings there. And it just demonstrates the type of journey that organizations are going through. Not everyone has got all of this under control, which I find is absolutely fascinating. In fact, 50% of that group said that the e-procurement system has been developed and implemented, 30% saying it's being in the process of implementation. So we're making progress. It's good to then exchange and share things that work and challenges that are faced. But yeah, there's still quite some time to go on that. In terms of training, in terms of getting people equipped, ready to implement these systems, well, 75% said they relied on the job training and gaining that experience rather than some of the other e-learning systems that there are. So it just shows you the value. You've got to get these systems in, you've got to use them, develop them, work them out for yourself. Then they can start to deliver some value to the business.
Was there much correlation in terms of industry sector and spend under management, or was it fairly random?
To be honest, James, I don't go to that level of detail. I mean, it'd be fascinating to know. And my sense is, certain sectors, certain industries are mature than others, but then complexity kicks in. And as we said a few minutes ago, that can actually almost be a counter-efficient issue because of the large multi sort of countries that you're trying to implement these systems. We tend to look at it as a whole and look across all of the sectors and industries.
And CASME is actually pretty global, aren't they? With the exception of Latin America, you're pretty well represented globally. So that's a pretty indicative study of what's going on.
Oh, James, no, we've got Latin America's a big tick in the box.
Oh.
South Africa. If you're going to pick up on one region, South Africa is an area that we're weak in. But Latin America, we run our Portuguese-speaking events in Sao Paulo and Spanish-speaking in Mexico City. So Latin America is a fun, very important region for really getting a feel for what is going on in North America. And I would liken it to sort of the APAC region in terms of overall procurement maturity.
Interesting. Okay. So I genuinely didn't know that.
Oh,
every day's a school day.
James.
So just to wrap up then, Graham, to appreciate your time, where's the best place that people can learn more a bit about you or connect with you or about what CASME does with different events and content that you put together?
So obviously CASME.com is the website. CASME Network is the LinkedIn name for the company. And I'm very active myself on LinkedIn. So Graham Crawshaw, really, it's helpful actually having a surname that makes it easy to find on LinkedIn. So those are probably the best three ways to come and find out some more as to what we're doing and what I'm passionate about when it comes to procurement.
Awesome. We'll link to all of those in the notes. Graham, it's been a pleasure catching up and all the best. Cheers.
Thanks, James.
So that was Graham from CASME with some very interesting insights from his many, many years within the profession and also facilitating and putting content together for a leading procurement practitioner network. So always good to talk to someone that's got a lot of inside info in that regard. Just a quick one before we sign off. Don't forget procurementsoftware.site is your one-stop shop if you want to get a quick overview of the different procurement tech solutions providers on the market, free to use for anyone on the buy side, and you can search and filter based on multiple different criteria. We've now got over 300 solutions listed, so you'll definitely find a short list of what you're after. Thank you again for listening to the show. Take care, and until the next time, bye for now.